China isn't our ally. They're not our friends. They're not the friends of our allies either. They're our enemy. So when you have people who have got close ties with China, the way that the Desmarais family does, and they're virtually, unentangleable at this point, right? And you've got them backing Mark Carney, who's also a Davos man. Well, I mean, what message is this sending if this guy is going to cruise into leading Canada? And most importantly, right now, is this somebody that the United States is going to do business with? Mm-hmm. I don't believe that.
Andy, it is so nice to finally have you on the podcast. I've been reaching out for a while. I know you don't like doing these, but I said this offline and I've said this on X, but I see you as being the flip side to the Sam Cooper coin. And I think you are so important to the things that are happening in this country and, as a consequence, the world at large. And, I started following you when I came back to Twitter. It must have been 2021 because I thought it was 2022, but it must have been 2021 because I followed the first iteration of your account. And I remember reading the stuff that you were finding and thinking, like, am I hallucinating this person's account? Because how is it possible that I'm reading all these things that this lady is finding and putting out there and it's not hitting mainstream at all? And then you disappeared one day out of the blue. And then you came back. And when you came back with a vengeance. I mean, you've been on a tear for the past couple of years. And that's the reason why I've wanted to talk to you, because you have this talent for digging into just piles and mountains of documents and finding information that has been, I would say, purposely hidden from the public. So I want to start our conversation by asking, I mean, what motivated you to do this? What motivated you to do all these deep dives and start finding the information?
Yeah, well, I also took a undesired break from Twitter when my account was suspended in 2022, and it remains suspended, and the secrets died with that account. But I did come back with a vengeance on a mission. And my mission was to try to inform Canadians. And how did I get there? I got there. I wasn't always a pundit or whatever you want to call me. I didn't know much about politics, but my mother died under lockdowns. So I was one of those people who didn't get to say goodbye. Yeah. And I was one of those people who didn't get to have a funeral. Yeah. And I got a Zoom with a dead body. And it was really hard. And I got angry. I got angry about the lockdowns, so I got involved. And I was also political. I started a little bit before that, but during the pandemic, I ran in the 2021 federal election. Yeah. And then started to get really, really vocal about lockdowns. Lockdowns, of course, brought me to, the origin of the pandemic. And the origin of the pandemic led me to China. And, my children are half Chinese. They're Chinese Canadians. I'm very proud of that fact. And so I wanted to learn as much as I could about China and Canada and the pandemic. And then that brought me to, big NGOs like the WHO. And then that brought me to, other organizations like the WEF and the Canada-China Business Council. And, all of these organizations are very much intertwined, and a lot of the members maintain incestuous relationships. And, these are big, unelected bodies that seek to influence governments and form public policy. And that brings us, of course, to the current state of where we're at in Canada, is we're looking at potentially having a prime minister installed, that being Mark Carney, who no Canadian has ever voted for before. It's a very unusual position to be in.
Yeah.
I kind of went on a mission to take out Justin Trudeau, but the intention of that mission wasn't to have somebody worse.
Yeah, totally.
Put into his place. And I think that that's the position that we're in right now. Yeah. The goal was to force an election. And so, I tried to do that in any way possible. And the only way to do that is, is to try to take them out of power. And how do you do that? You research, you get involved, you share information, you wake people up, so that they understand. Having run an election, again, I put this out actually, I read like how important it is, because we have a highly subsidized corporate mainstream media that most people watch, or a good portion of our population watch, and that's where they get the bulk of their information from. And then during the pandemic, we sort of saw a shift from that, and people are turning more and more to different sources for online information. They're looking at YouTube's, they're looking at Twitter, they're looking at Rumble and other sources, podcasts, right? So we saw a shift from people, only getting their information from one source, which is, that kind of that press release that goes out and they all duplicate it and change the heading a little bit, into them having access to different sources of information. And so, but going back to what I was saying about the election, is one of the most important things is that you make sure that you get out on your feet and actually try to reach people on the ground who maybe haven't made that shift yet.
Right.
And, so go out, get engaged, go door knocking. I've done it. It's a great thing to do. Podcasts are really important. And then you can direct them to sources of different information, right?
Yeah.
If you learn more about what's going on in our elections, you can, go look here. You don't have to look at, what you subsidized, which is, I believe, a highly sanitized version of events that omits a lot of things, perhaps on purpose.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you brought us to the subject of today's conversation. Here in Canada, we are in a very precarious position. As of this morning, the day that you and I are recording, President Trump has, or at least news has hit that President Trump is pushing his administration to remove Canada from the Five Eyes Alliance. And that's really bad news, man. That's really, really bad news for us. Now, to be clear, the United States created a new defensive alliance in 2021 called AUKUS, which is the Five Eyes partners minus Canada and New Zealand. And that kind of flew under the radar for most Canadians, as everything normally does. But that was a huge moment in time, because Canada and New Zealand are the two countries most notably infiltrated by Chinese interests. And so
we're also net contributors and not net beneficiaries and not net contributors to that information alliance. That's a note. New Zealand and Canada are the weakest links in
right.
that. So I don't think that it was an error that we were the two that were admitted, because again, we're the ones benefiting. We're not contributing.
Right. Okay. So there's that too. So we were omitted because we are net beneficiaries rather than net contributors. But I think this China thing, so, through my conversations with Sam Cooper, I've had many, what I've come to learn is that this whole China-Canada connection has been on the U.S. intelligence radar for quite a long time. I mean, we were designated as a security threat under the Biden administration, and now Trump is just acting on the suspicions and the investigations that were conducted by American intelligence agencies. And Sam broke a story a few weeks ago, which pretty much confirmed that the American intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies are no longer sharing information with Canadian Border Services, RCMP, or CSIS because of their concerns of compromise. So that said, we're walking into an election, hopefully. Maybe not. We'll see, right? Democracy seems to be the Liberals' favorite word, but it's something that I don't think they understand what it means. But we're supposed to have an election soon. Mark Carney is unquestionably going to be our unelected prime minister. For our American listeners, the Liberal Party, which is basically our Democrat Party, is currently holding a leadership race to determine who the next leader is going to be. And that whole thing is just a theater. We know that. It's all a show. It's entertainment. The other candidates, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau's former finance minister, a lady that I lovingly refer to as Nazi granddaughter, Karina Gould, who is part of Trudeau's cabinet, another lady that I lovingly refer to as obnoxious minivan mom, and then other people that you don't need to give a fuck about because they just don't matter. They're all kind of there, part of this show to put to get Carney ahead and get him into that leadership position. Now, because Canada is under the British parliamentary system, once Trudeau formally resigns, Mark Carney will end up as our de facto or default prime minister as the Liberal leader, and he will remain prime minister until we have an election. Now, the idea is that we have a snap election or an election shortly afterward. I'm not so confident that that's going to happen. So now that I've given this big, long spiel and explained how this all works, Andy, what I wanted to ask you, because this has kind of been the focal point of a lot of your work over the last few years, and I think it's important that people know how these people are being funded and where the funding is coming from. So I want to just get a bird's eye view of the funding that goes into the Liberal Party in Canada. That's Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, and all the other rats on that ship. Where is that funding coming from, and who are the groups who are funding them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first candidate whose contributions, donations to their campaign I looked through was Mark Carney's. Because again, he sort of just swooped in, the central banker who's got 3 citizenships, has never run in an election, has never tried to run in a by-election, has advised behind the scenes Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland over the year. And then he just sort of saw his opportunity to, cruise into being the Prime Minister of Canada. So I wanted to know who was funding him first. And the biggest names that stuck out to me were the Desmarais family. So the Desmarais family, some people might know them, some people might not. So the Desmarais family founded something in 1984, and that was an organization called Power Corporation. And what is Power Corporation? It's, I guess if you want to say that Canada has a deep state, I would say that Power Corporation is part of our deep state apparatus, for Americans. So, it's this big corporation that flies around throwing money at all kinds of things. And so, 2 of Mark Carney's max donors were, I believe it was, let me just check. I've got it up here. So that was Oliver and Paul. So Oliver is the vice president of Power Corporation. It was founded by Paul Desmarais, who passed away in 1984. And now we've got Paul, the other Paul Jr., donating to Mark Carney's campaign. So they're all intertwined in this huge entity. And this is, these are multi-billionaires. So very, very wealthy, powerful family. This corporation was founded under a different Trudeau. That would be Pierre Elliott Trudeau was in power when Power Corporation came about being. And the other notable thing about this entity is that the honorary chair is Andre Desmarais. Now, Andre Desmarais married a Chrétien, and that would be the daughter of our former Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, who also had very, very close ties with China. Andre is something else. He's part of the Canada-China Business Council. So the Canada-China Business Council is, I like to say it's the unofficial de facto chamber of commerce between Canada and China. It was founded in 1978, and it's sort of comprised of all these characters that have got a lot of business dealings in China. And this was during a time, where Pierre Elliott Trudeau had just established relationships with China. He did that in 1973, I believe. Went over, met Chairman Mao. This was during, while the Cultural Revolution was raging, which saw millions of Chinese, millions and millions, tens of millions of Chinese, die and be subjected to struggle sessions and other atrocities. But, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was he loved communists, right? He also loved Fidel Castro. He had a deep admiration for dictatorships. So during, the height of the Cultural Revolution, Pierre Elliott Trudeau decided that he was going to go over and forge diplomatic ties with China. And then, after Mao, we had Deng Xiaoping, and he had a different take than Mao, and that was supposed to be a period of opening up in China, right? Where China was going to sort of open itself up to the world. And so I think that, there was a tremendous, atmosphere of hope that China was going to go in a much different direction than Chairman Mao. So all of these diplomatic, chambers of commerce were established, and the Canada-China Business Council was one of them. And the Desmarais family and the Power Corp is firmly sort of throwing their weight behind this. But we know that what happened with China is that it didn't open up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And with the reign of Xi Jinping, it's become more and more of a dictatorship than it's ever been. And also more and more dangerous, because when we established diplomatic relationships with them in the 1970s, we had a huge trade imbalance, but we were in power, right? So, we had a surplus, and now we're looking at a massive trade deficit in China. So was it a beneficial relationship? Sure. But we were not cautious enough with our own national security. We outsourced a lot of things. We lost our self-reliance. And now we're basically looking at irrelevancy on the world stage, which is, why America is, I believe, leaving us out of things. Yeah, I just, so, this is kind of the background. So these are some of the names that have thrown themselves behind Mark Carney. Now, another thing happened in 1978 as well that was interesting. 1978 wasn't just the year that the Canada-China Business Council was formed. It was also that year that Klaus Schwab, yes, the Schwab of the World Economic Forum, started to take interest in Deng Xiaoping. And the next year was the first year that a Chinese delegation was invited to Davos. And so, it seemed like a lot of these things happened simultaneously. And then a lot of these councils and organizations and chambers of commerce started to do business together. And, that's where this whole globalism thing was sort of, this monstrous thing that is globalism. That was the birthplace of a lot of these ideas, was during that time period. And I think that they believed honestly that they were going to be able to deal with authoritarian and dictatorship governments and bring them into the fold, and they tried. But again, China isn't our ally. They're not our friends. They're not the friends of our allies either. They're our enemy. So when you have people who have got close ties with China, the way that the Desmarais family does, and they're virtually, unentangleable at this point, right? And you've got them backing Mark Carney, who's also a Davos man. Well, I mean, what message is this sending if this guy is going to cruise into leading Canada? And most importantly, right now, is this somebody that the United States is going to do business with?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that. I don't think that this is the direction that they want to be going in. I believe that we're going in the wrong direction. And I don't think that they're doing that much to solve the tariff problem, which does need to be solved. I don't think we should, necessarily roll over and take it. I don't think that's the answer. But I don't know if they're honestly looking for real solutions, which would, should involve negotiations and trying to find an acceptable middle ground to our problems, right? And we have a huge problem with national security right now.
Yeah.
We do. So I don't think that they're necessarily trying to solve those problems the way that a different administration might solve them, because I don't think that they're that concerned if they start a trade war, because a trade war would have us running to other countries for sources and decreasing our reliance on the United States. But that would also mean that we need to find other countries to fill that gap, which could in some way be beneficial to us, depending on the country. But what country is that going to be? And is that country maybe going to be China?
It is, but without question. And I want to just jump in here and add this, because from a historical context, whenever you have a military superpower or a country that just has a strong military in general and an adversarial nation bordering them, it 100% of the time ends with that nation being annexed. Every single time. Because, for example, if you're Germany and you have Poland bordering you and they're politically a threat to you in any way, or could, for example, be a gateway for enemies to enter into your country, they are going to annex your country, which is what they did with Poland. They did that and they split it with Russia, right? And so this is bad for us. And, Trump keeps talking about this 51st state thing. It kind of comes off as a troll, but there's a very real aspiration beneath it. And it doesn't have anything to, it does have something to do with them wanting access to, say, for example, Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan, our potash, our uranium, our oil and gas. But what it even more alludes to is the fact that the United States cannot have an adversarial nation on their border, especially if that nation is basically acting as an extension of their most dangerous enemy, which happens to be China. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. And the thing is most Canadians don't understand this. They don't understand why the things that are happening why things are happening that are happening. But this is something that has been growing for a very long time. And Justin Trudeau really just turned it up to 11. And now we have a federal government that is, by all accounts and for all intents and purposes, merely an extension of CCP interests. So I want to set the focus on Trudeau for a second, because this is kind of where this is where we are right now. He's resigned, but hasn't resigned because whatever, he's holding he's holding our country ransom or hostage until his party finds the new Liberal candidate, which is Mark Carney. So whatever. But let's talk about Trudeau and his relationship to China. Through your investigations, what are some of the main connections and the main relationships that stand out to you?
Yeah, well, going back to the Canada-China Business Council, we know that Dominic Barton was part of that. And of course, he was also our Chinese ambassador during a time of great strife between Canada and China. And that was, of course, when Meng was detained by Canada, and Meng, of course, being the CFO of Huawei. So, at the request of the United States. And so that caused a huge rift. And of course, the backlash to that was the hostage taking of our two Michaels.
Right.
Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig. So, that was who Justin chose to be on his team, was Dominic Barton. Dominic Barton was also, a very high level executive at McKinsey, who was part of the opioid crisis, which saw lawsuits and things like that. And it was terrible what happened and the fallout that's still happening. So, that was sort of, the opioid crisis. Right now we're talking about fentanyl. The opioid crisis has been going on for a long time. And one of the men who was in charge of McKinsey when, that happened and was Justin Trudeau's guy, that
Big
was,
surprise.
that was his guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, Justin Trudeau really followed in his father's footsteps. I believe he came into his first term, wanting to make his mark, right? He really wanted to leave his imprint. And one of the first ways that he tried to do that is he wanted to negotiate a free trade deal with China. Right? That was really his thing. And Freeland, I believe she was foreign minister. Mm-hmm. So she was on board with that. And so we had all of these meetings, and Premier Li Keqiang came over, and and this was what they kind of went all in on. Mm-hmm. Is we're going to get this free trade deal with China. And that was, I think they thought that was going to be Canada's economic savior, right? If we have this, this mutual free trade agreement, then, it would be beneficial to Canada, and we could boost our productivity and boost our GDP and things like that and help each other grow. That was a very naive thing for them to do. Xi Jinping was a new ruler back then in the day, but I don't think that they approached that relationship with the caution that they should have. And so, that was supposed to be, I think, Justin Trudeau's crowning achievement, something that was worthy of his father's legacy, which was, being one of the first people to forge economic ties with China. But of course, then our Michaels were kidnapped.
Yeah.
And that changed everything, right? And it was a real wake-up call as to who we're dealing with, and can we have somebody who takes hostages as a reliable partner, and should this country be an ally of ours? And of course, most people would resoundingly say no. So I mean, that's kind of Justin Trudeau's legacy.
Sorry.
It's not a good one.
Right.
It's not a good one. That was sort of his biggest accomplishment, was trying to forge economic ties with China and failing, right? Yeah. But I mean, that soft touch has haunted him throughout his reign as prime minister. And of course, the end result of that was that we had our National Security Agency, which is CSIS, for Americans, ultimately leaking information out to the press, warning that his administration had been compromised in multiple ways, and candidates had been compromised in multiple ways. So, and I believe that was done out of desperation, because we weren't taking this intelligence seriously. And so the other legacy that he's leaving is we had to eventually hold a public inquiry on foreign interference. And a lot of people say that that's a nothing burger. It wasn't a nothing burger, the results, because the results actually, I would have gone further than what the results said. And I did submit to that as well.
You're being so nice.
But the results did deem that ridings they believed had been lost because of Chinese interference. That's nothing to scoff at.
Yeah.
I believe that there is at least one, and probably more. I'm going to say at least two, but probably more people who are now sitting in our House of Commons. Well, they're not sitting because they prorogued government. If you don't know what that is to Americans, it means that they shut it down because they're in crises. So nobody's really running Canada right now.
Well, China is, but
So we had two, members of parliament who are elected, who could get pensions for life and are who being paid by taxpayers, who were incorrectly elected because of Chinese interference. So that's his other legacy. And again, it's not a kind one. And going back to our elections in the Canada-China Business Council, one of those characters that came under scrutiny for foreign interference was somebody that Justin Trudeau knew very well and campaigned with in his early years, and that was MP Han Dong. So Han Dong, as the security leaks go, stay with me, guys, apparently brought in busloads of foreign students to vote for him during his nomination campaign, perhaps at the direction of the People's Republic of China's consulate. So this was a huge scandal, and he was one of those MPs where it was like, well, maybe this person shouldn't have been elected. Nobody really knew how much he won his nomination race by, but I did find that information out. I went into and found a China News Service article, and it said that he only won by 14 votes, his nomination race. So a bus holds how many, and how many buses showed up.
Yeah.
And if these the article was fascinating as well, and this was cited in the inquiry. This information that I gave out, it said that it was chaotic that day. There was students everywhere. But one of the most striking things that I found is that the China News Service article also said that there was huge lines to nominate, to vote in his nominations, and that people got turned away 2 or 3 times because they didn't have the correct ID.
Right.
Now that really struck a chord with me, because I'm like, okay, if you go to vote and you don't bring any ID,
yeah, who's
voting? And we've got a broad list of acceptable forms of ID that you can vote in these nomination contests in. So if people have to go and run around 2 or 3 times and come back to find the correct form of ID, who was voting, and was it their ID? And these were the questions that CSIS brought up. But an interesting character that was on Han Dong's team and on Team Trudeau was Wei Changyi. So Wei Changyi is a Canadian Chinese businessman. And he was also one of the people who were under scrutiny for running our overseas police stations in Canada, which have apparently been shut down, but they're still operating. So Mr. Changyi is, again, he's a businessman. Ran Han Dong's campaign, was definitely backing the Liberal Party, has apparently been surveilled by CSIS, and is one of these people who are running these overseas stations. And what are these overseas stations doing? We don't know exactly what they're doing, but I did get an idea, and I'll get to that. Because there's so many of them. And again, this is another place where on a smaller scale, like on the large scale, you've got an incestuous relationship with Chinese officials infiltrating the big NGOs, right? But then on, a national level, you've got something similar happening with hometown associations, right? And chambers of commerce, where you've also got people who have maybe perhaps got dual loyalties, or perhaps their sole loyalty is to China, running these hometown associations and then backing certain candidates in election. So Wei Changyi was one of these guys. He's actually been recognized personally overseas in China by Xi Jinping. And, during the inquiry, we heard that nobody really knew that China was interfering in this race. Well, Wei Changyi, I've got photos of him with his red invitation, personally being invited to be recognized by Xi Jinping overseas. That's pretty extraordinary. There's billions of people around the world. So if you're the one that's got that invite, and he said he was honored. I'm sure it was an honor for him. But most of us, are never going to see anything like that. And we're certainly not going to get invited overseas to shake the supreme ruler of China's hand. But yet Han Dong and Justin Trudeau's guy did. Right? And another fascinating thing, and this brings us back to how these guys make it big. So despite being perhaps a part of these overseas Chinese stations that, again, if you've got Wei Chang'e spending all of his time in China, meeting with United Front officials, meeting with, high-ranking Chinese officials, actually meeting Xi Jinping himself, and then he comes back here and he inserts himself into our elections and runs our elections, then what's going on? Now, you would think that somebody might take action on this, but this is Clown Show Canada.
Yeah.
So Wei Chang'e instead received a promotion, and he was appointed to the board of directors recently on the Canada-China Business Council with Mark Carney's top donors, the Desmarais family.
Jesus.
Do you see where I'm going with this? Do you see the problems here?
Yeah. Like, okay, I just want to, excuse me.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I know. I'm shocked too. You would think, this is somebody who's been surveilled and sealed by CSIS. I can almost guarantee you that probably there's places in the United States that have a file on him. I certainly have a large file on him. He's been implicated in foreign interference. And, in some countries, we might distance ourselves from somebody like this who could potentially be performing activities and definitely seems to have divided loyalties between Canada and China. And I mean, these are, again, normal activities. I used to look at them with more rose-colored glasses because, again, my children are Chinese. Mm-hmm. So my husband was, his parents were from Hong Kong. But, and I'm very proud of their Chinese heritage. Like, we go to cultural events and things like that, lion dances and spring festivals, and we celebrate that kind of stuff. But you know what my family's never done? They've never gone and waved a PRC flag and done a little march around with our consul general, which is what these Chinese Canadians do. So they're living in a very different reality than a lot of our other Chinese Canadians are. And they do maintain very close ties with the Chinese consulate, and that's a huge concern. So, I mean, why are these guys helping out in our elections? I mean, Wei Chang'e's office was used to launch Han Dong's campaign, right? I mean, this guy's a national security threat. We have no idea what he's doing over there in China. But again, if you're being recognized by Xi Jinping, I'm going to say maybe you shouldn't be involved in our elections, but that's not what happened. So for his role in this saga, he's been awarded a board position at Power Corp, and now he gets to spread his influence on the world stage, right? Instead of on the national level. So this sort of stuff is wild, and I think that this is why America is really taking a look at Canada and saying, well, what's going on? I'm also looking at Canada saying, what's exactly going on here? And, Trudeau pretended that the CSIS leaks didn't exist. We heard, we've heard this line before. The reporting is false. The reporting is false. The reporting wasn't false at all. Because I went and found those articles that showed, and I also found Han Dong, not just Han Dong, but Justin Trudeau himself at this school, which apparently brought in international students to vote for Han Dong. They've both visited the school. Han Dong visited the school. Justin Trudeau has visited the school. One of the people who works at the school used to work with Justin Trudeau at Great Plain Academy. So you know what? When a CSIS memo landed on Justin Trudeau's desk saying, we have concerns about these foreign students being brought in to vote in nomination competitions, presumably they would have known what school, and they would have just said, well, we know these guys. right?
Yeah.
We've been there. We party with them on Parliament Hill. They
Hmm.
do.
Yeah.
So, and it's stuff like this where you have to say what's going on. And then this brings us back to our current state of things is, Ruby Dalla. So one of our leadership candidates was just disqualified. And part of the rationale given was that she had a foreigner working on her campaign. Now, we don't know who this foreigner was, and there's no details, but I mean, this was the rationale. Now, first of all, that's not even part of election rules in Canada. If we
Hmm.
said that there was no foreigners allowed to work in campaigns, nobody would ever get to run.
Well, yeah.
I mean, look at our immigration numbers and look at
Yeah.
our number of permanent residents
Right.
and people waiting, right? Nobody would ever get to run if that was actually a real thing. That's not even a
Yeah.
real rule.
Right.
But I mean, when you look at what Justin Trudeau's done, and then Ruby getting kicked out for this allegation, not that we shouldn't we should take it seriously, but I'm kind of like, let's get real here. You just didn't want this woman running. I mean, this
Yeah.
can't be a thing. If you're really going to say that having a foreign, person working on your campaign is all of a sudden a disqualifier
Yeah.
being nominated as a Liberal candidate, I mean, let's get a grip here.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, Justin Trudeau was basically the chosen one um, by China back in the day, and we've got voting lists that seem like that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, the Ruby Dalla thing is interesting to me because, when she first emerged, I kind of thought it was a fun joke. I was like retweeting her stuff and making these hyperbolic statements about her being, the true leader of the free world. But then, what was interesting was the more I listened to her speak, the more I thought she's maybe, realistically not a prime minister, but she's somebody that I would like to have in our government, because she seems to have a grip on what's actually going on, and she doesn't seem to have a fear of addressing it. And then, of course, the liberals sink her campaign, because I think they started to think that she was actually a real threat because she was talking on social media and doing interviews and actually starting to build a real actual following, a real support base. And, the two women that are left in this race, and I say that very loosely because it's not a race. Mark Carney is a foregone conclusion. But Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould are basically just in there as lackeys to prop up Carney and make it look like there's some sort of leadership race happening. I mean, I didn't watch the debates because I'm not paying attention to any of this shit because I already know how this is going to end. Right. So none of what happens between here and Mark Carney becoming our unelected prime minister means a fucking thing to me. But, I saw a clip of like where he said something and then he was kind of pressed by the moderator at the debate. And then Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould both rushed into his defense. I'm like, are you not supposed to be debating this fucking guy? Are you not running against him in a leadership race for your silly political party? Like, why are you racing to his defense? And that was like a very revealing moment to me because it's obvious that they're in the race to make it appear to give us the theater of a leadership race. But really what they're trying to do is it appears like they're vying for positions in his future cabinet. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it just certainly wasn't a debate. As I said, this is supposed to be a conversation where there's opposing ideals. They were just all backpatting
Yeah.
each other, but definitely making sure that Carney was well protected and defended,
Yeah.
which is not the sort of thing you do if you're actually gunning to be prime minister. But again, look at who's behind them, right? Chrystia Freeland's a WEF member, right? Part of the Davos elite. Mark Carney is certainly part of that group. And a lot of their donors are part of that group, right? And so, I mean, they want him in power. There's no doubt about it. Their donations have, said that they've kind of said the quiet part out loud by accident, by, showing us who they're donating to. Um, and yeah, I mean, Ruby, she had to go.
Yeah.
Ruby had to go. She wasn't part of that gang. And this was one of the funniest things is when, there was on our heavily funded mainstream media, a political pundit was talking about why she had to be disqualified. And they said that they went back in her timeline on her social media and she had spoken out against the WEF. Well, and that's a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory.
It exists. It's fucking real.
Like all of their stuff is right on their website. You can look whenever you
Yeah.
want, right? I'm not gonna go all the way down the rabbit hole on this, but I mean, let's call it what it is. This is a very powerful billionaires club, and they're a giant unelected lobby who seek to influence governments, and put in their own policy. And most of them, of course, are very, very affluent, wealthy business owners. So they stand to benefit. So it's very, very fair to question whether these people should have any influence at all in our government, right? And people are resoundingly waking up and saying, no, we don't want these big foreign supposed NGOs, advising our politicians, right? We're saying no to this. So, I mean, another guy that donated to Carney, that Carney just met with, is Scott Bryson. Scott Bryson, I think he's vice president of BMO Emerging Wealth Markets. You know what else Bryson is? Guess what he's a part of? Have you learned anything yet?
The World Economic Forum.
No. Yeah,
the Canada-China Business Council.
He's a board member of the Canada-China Business Council. That's right. And I looked up Mark Carney's campaign financials to see if he had taken any loans out, and he did. And guess where he got them?
Scott Bryson.
BMO. Yeah.
It's so
it's a big club, and we aren't in it. Okay,
Andy,
I'm going to tell you right now. And there's very precious little that we can do to stop a machine of this magnitude. But every little bit helps, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, I'll say this. Look, there's a reason why one of your posts on X is more viewed than any article printed in the CBC. There's a reason why there are more people listening and viewing this podcast than any television show on CBC. There's a reason why Sam Cooper is Sam Cooper. And it's because we all intrinsically or intuitively know that something is going on. Something is very fucking wrong. And the rest of the world can see it. Trump can see it. His intelligence agencies know it. And yet what's happened is the emperor's walking around with no clothes. We all see the naked emperor. But his handlers, being the media and the power corporation and other bureaucrats, the Canada-China Business Council, are all pretending like none of us can see what's actually happening here. And as I wrote this morning, President Trump just has the temerity to point out what we all know and say, okay, enough is enough. We're not doing this anymore. Like, you guys are either going to be an ally or you're going to be an enemy. You make your choice, right? And that, again, like, I cannot stress how dangerous a place that is for us to be in. And it's not, we as Canadians, I can't say we, I will say weak bitch ass Canadians like to view themselves as victims, right? They always like to view themselves as being the helpless, compassionate, thoughtful victim getting punched in the face by the American bully. But that's not the case here. The case is that we've let the enemy in the door. They've been running the show for the last decade. And now the United States finally has a strong enough president who's coming in and saying, no, we're not allowing this anymore. Get your shit together or we're going to run your show for you. Right?
Yeah, no, I believe that's true. I believe that, and again, like, I believe that a lot of this goes back further than a decade. I believe it goes back to the 1970s
Right.
When we started to make bad decisions, every inch we gave China, they took a mile, and now they've surpassed us by far. And, we helped, give them the stepping stones that they needed to become a threat, the only real credible threat, probably one of the only ones towards our greatest ally and our neighbors.
Yeah.
So, we allowed that to happen. And again, when you look at going back to the current fentanyl issue, well, I mean, we didn't pay attention to the opioid crisis. We welcomed the people who were causing it with open arms into positions in our government.
Yeah.
So, this predates the current crisis. And now, pardon me.
She's just pausing to take a cough. We both have a cold, people. Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you look at it, so now we're looking at fentanyl. It's a whole new crisis. Same actor.
Yeah.
McKinsey was deep in with China, and still is, right? A lot of people hedged their bets on China becoming moving more towards a democratic nation. That didn't happen. What happened is that the democratic nations moved closer to becoming dictatorships, which is what we see in Canada, right? Like, we're being held hostage by a rogue government that we can't seem to get rid of. And now we're looking at, having maybe a leader that nobody's ever voted for, which is wild.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, I do believe that that's true. We've considerably weakened ourselves on the world stage, and we did this in favor of, funding liberal pet projects and things like that, and all kinds of bonkers things, while not meeting our basic national security needs, and while not meeting our defense spending needs and things like that. Not just in NATO, but domestically. Like, we only spend, I saw something this morning, it's like 34 billion maybe on defense. The cost of servicing our debt is almost twice as much as that.
Yeah.
Right. When you look at what do we give towards border security? 1.2 billion. It's like nothing. We dished out 5 billion to Ukraine yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's great that we're helping Ukraine take care of itself, but we've also considerably, made ourselves irrelevant on the world stage, which is why maybe people are thinking of, nobody likes, nobody likes somebody leeching off them forever. Yeah. So, we're not contributing to border security. We're not contributing to military. We're not contributing to the Arctic strategy. I think we just have like one or two submarines, and one was out of service for like 14 years. Went out to sea.
Yeah.
Right? We're not contributing to our NATO defense spending targets. We're over contributing to all kinds of bonkers, gender bender stuff all over the world.
Yeah.
Like, we're sending, what was that one that I filmed? Like, we're sending a whole bunch of like gender diverse flip books in Africa, in the Congo or something. Like, people are being massacred in the Republic of the Congo, right?
Yeah.
And we're sending them like flip books, money for flip books on gender.
Yeah.
Let's get real here, right? We've got our priorities all backwards.
Yeah.
And then on the national security stage as well, you're looking at energy security. I've always said national security is energy security. You cannot have national security without energy security.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's one of the things that Trump is beginning to turn his focus on too. It became, it started with the border, but now he's starting to talk more about Keystone XL. Maybe we couldn't help that being canceled under Biden and Trudeau, but is our next administration going to help get those projects built so that we can look at energy security, right? Justin Trudeau has said to all of our allies, our supposed allies, Germany came sniffing around for LNG, and Justin Trudeau said there's no business case for LNG. And then I think Japan came asking for LNG too. And Japan, of course, is an ally of Taiwan, right? And they are going to be a key player in geopolitically in what will happen. between China and Taiwan. So they came looking for LNG, and Justin Trudeau said, sorry, there's no business case for LNG, go home. So, so these are all the things. And then there was our critical minerals. And that's something that I investigated in one of my first accounts. And that was one of my first big game changers, is when I looked at how we were selling off, our critical mineral assets, not just in Canada, but worldwide, because we do have mines that we used to hold worldwide, specifically in South Africa and Argentina and things like that. Why are we selling these assets off to Chinese state-owned entities without national security reviews? Or even better, why are we selling them off at all? And here's the problem with mining, is that mining, it's a very, very slow process. It might take 10 years from, when you know that this is a viable project, until you're actually churning out the end product and seeing returns. And this is something that China's done brilliantly, because, these state-owned enterprises can be heavily funded and backed by the Chinese government. So when we've got smaller or mid-sized businesses, Canadian businesses that are floundering, and they need investment to sustain them over that very long timeline until they have a product that they can get to market, and, they see fruition of their investments, a lot of times they're lacking. And so China steps in and says, well, here, we'll give you this money and we'll take this cut. And then you might get another Chinese business, and this has actually happened in Canada, who comes in and says, oh, you're hurting for money. We'll take this stake. We'll give you this much money to get you along. And then before you know it, all of a sudden, these two Chinese businesses have merged, and then they control your company. And it's not Canadian anymore, it's Chinese. And then you're done.
How often does that happen, Andy?
I can't say how often it happens, but I can say that this was one of these things that just, we can go through all this on another day. If you want to do a show just on mines, we can do a show just on mines.
I would love to.
But, and this is how it works, and how they sort of gain a foothold. And I mean, we think we're all about critical minerals now. Our critical mineral strategy was just put in after, the lithium mines scandal, where we had Zijin taking over our lithium mines. And that actually gained traction in the United States. And I contacted Senator Mike Waltz, and Mike Waltz wanted to know what was going on. So I actually contacted Senator Mike Waltz, he's been given a position now in Trump's administration, I believe.
I think so, yeah. I don't know which one, but yeah.
But anyway, so we just got our critical mineral strategy, right? Put into place in the following budget. And the only reason that happened is because the United States took notice, and they were like, what's going on here in Canada? And why aren't these being subjected to national security reviews, right? And why aren't we looking at stockpiling these assets? So we kind of got caught with our pants down on that one, and got snookered into making a critical mineral strategy. But in any event, I mean, when you look at China, the first things I found in Chinese literature is that they started stockpiling these assets and making a critical mineral strategy in the 1970s.
Right.
So we're not just decades behind them, we're like half a century behind them, right? Which is how they've gained dominance in that market.
Yeah.
And now they hold sway over us, right?
Yeah.
So we have to look at all these things. So, when we're dealing with the United States, it's okay to say, you can go ahead and say, we're going to slap dollar for dollar tariffs on. I don't think that cares. I don't think they care about that at all. I don't think Trump has any intention of working with this administration, especially given, what a clown show this leadership race had turned into. And it is just pure theater, right?
Yeah.
Enjoy the show. We all bought a ticket to it. You all pay for it with your taxes.
Right.
So I don't think Trump has any intention of working with this current administration, because I don't think that they don't have a track record of being serious on these sort of things, historically speaking. And I don't think that they have an intention of being serious about these things going forward. So what are we going to do, right? I think we need a new government, somebody that he's going to work with, and somebody who's going to take these problems seriously. And we should have been taking this seriously.
Well, that's it. Look, right? we've been beyond.
It's precious.
Yeah, we're being little brothered right now. right? And that treatment is long overdue for exactly the reasons you just spent the last 58 minutes outlining, right? Because we have let our entire country spin out of control. We've been irresponsible and unaccountable for well over a decade, but let's just focus on the last decade because this all really did come to a head under Justin Trudeau. And now we are in a position where we are being held to account. The United States, our closest ally. Look, Canadians, whether you like it or not, we need the United States. We have thousands of miles of coast in the Arctic, open ocean, where Chinese and Russian submarines are routinely spotted. And I keep saying this on this podcast, but guys, you need to understand, we don't have the means to defend the Arctic, as Andy just explained to you.
China's got nuclear icebreakers.
Right.
Like we spent 14 years trying to get one submarine, one little guy, operational and back in the water.
Right. Right. So
okay, like this is the reality of Canada, and it's not necessarily Canadians' choice. And we're very much out of control because we know that our real GDP is declining, right?
yeah.
It's flatlined for a long time, and per capita it's on the decline. So we're not doing very well. And now with America becoming more and more attractive, we're seeing more of our businesses who are picking up and saying they're going. So it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Right.
It's going to take a very, very long time to get people to come back to Canada and want to do business. And this is why I wish Trump would. I'm not crazy about what he's doing with the tariffs. I understand that it's not his job to babysit Canada. It's his job to babysit America and take care of his own country. But, I wish that he would go easy because a lot of people are just even hearing about the tariffs and they're like, I mean, why would you set up business in Canada? You're going to war with your greatest trading partner. And I mean, we don't, I mean, I don't, sorry, I put it out there, but I don't remember how many more trillion, but it's the US economy is trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars bigger than the Canadian economy.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you're going to put $30 billion worth of tariffs on it, you're not even going to make a dent.
No, and I think what it is it's a form of political pressure to force Canadians to vote in a new government, right? And unfortunately, I think that the game that he's playing may backfire because Canadians, we are very good at cutting off our nose to spite our face, and we may end up with a Mark Carney government. Just because he's the one who, is most opposite to President Donald Trump, which is really bad news for us. And just going back to the Arctic thing, because I've had this conversation just with regular people on the street, and something that I've explained to them, and guys, this is why the Arctic is important, because if China wants to shoot a nuclear missile into the United States, they can do it from a submarine in the Arctic easily. Right. And so that's why the United States is up there defending our coastline, because as Andy explained, we don't have the means to do it. We don't even have the beginnings of the ability to do it. And again, I'm not a fan of the tariffs either, but I understand what Trump is doing, and I think it's necessary. And furthermore, I'm an extremist on this side of things. I think it's time for BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan to leave Canada. I think it's been long overdue. We don't have a say in our federal elections. Quebec and Ontario and Atlantic Canada largely determine the outcome of our federal elections. So we don't, whoever becomes prime minister, we have no hand in at all. The equalization payments. I mean, we send billions and billions of dollars to the East Coast every single year and receive nothing in return. The entire relationship between the West and Eastern and Atlantic Canada has been lopsided in favor of the East and Atlantic Canada for a long time. And this isn't anything new to me. I have felt that the West should separate for a really long time. And I'm not one of these rednecks in a big lifted truck who just wants to be a rebel and wants to do our own thing. I've thought about this quite a bit, and it just doesn't make sense. Why are we still part of this? Why are we still here, especially considering that we don't receive anything, of reciprocal value from the East or Atlantic Canada? And in the end, we just get shitted on repeatedly by every single federal government, right? I
Yeah,
mean, minus Stephen Harper. I
that's
think,
another thing. That's another, something that's been longstanding, and that was, a Elliott Trudeau thing too. It's it runs in the family. It's not it's not a glitch. It's a feature.
yeah,
Because Pierre Elliott Trudeau brought in, the national energy policy, which was devastating to Alberta, and our energy sector. So, it's a feature. It's not a bug. So Justin Trudeau, continued along the same lines as his dictatorship-loving father.
communist.
Communist. Communist. Yes, they're communists. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely in a abusive relationship in Confederation. There's no doubt about that. I did say, particularly if we lose the next federal election, I would strongly begin to advocate for secession.
Yeah.
Sorry, my voice is going to start giving.
Excuse me. Sorry, guys. We're both dealing with a cold right now. Both Andy and I have a cold, so we've been muting ourselves periodically so we can cough.
I said I might actually, come back and run in that, provincially.
I would love to see you do it.
And at that point, I would strongly begin to advocate for secession. If we see anything other than a conservative government brought into power at that point, I might be starting to really advocate that we leave Canada.
Yeah.
Strike it out on our own. Because, if you can't get a government like this out, then, and their reign has been long, right? And overdue, then, and again, particularly if you've got a government that is not going to be able to get along and work out a reasonable resolution with, one of our greatest trading partners, then what is there really left?
Right.
And what have you got to, what have you got to lose and what have you got to fear? So, I mean, I don't want to say we should break up with Canada yet. But well,
you're searching for a but.
Well, I mean, again, particularly if by chance the Liberal government pulls off and wins another election, under the crazy circumstances, which, believe me, folks, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like when you see that picture, like this is the corruption you know about, and then this is the surface of the water, and then the corruption that you don't know about is bigger than my screen. So yeah, I think that will be a lot of people's breaking point as well in Western Canada, because at this point, so much of our GDP is just being sustained by what little is left of our natural resources that, crazily we haven't been able to bring to Tidewater.
Yeah.
And unleash. And of course, Justin, I mean, Stephen Guilbeault's an episode in and of himself, but I mean, like he just killed Kitimat, right? Which is an LNG terminal in BC. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like they really are in the loot and pillage phase of Canada, trying to do as much damage, I think, as they can before they leave.
Yeah.
And make sure that their ideology, which is, you can say socialism if you like, but I think it's a little bit worse.
It's a little bit more left.
They're proud socialists. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I think that they're going to impose as much of their forced ideology upon us as they can before they leave. And then we've got Mark Carney, who last night, everybody was like, well, when is the election happening? We're, of course, due to have an election this year. And he said, not until I have to. And then, of course, a few weeks ago, he was on camera talking about emergency powers in Canada. Now, the last time emergency powers were used in Canada was used to crack down on peaceful protesters in Ottawa and seize our bank accounts. But there's another kind of emergency powers that are written, and we can do an entire episode on this, and emergency powers. But we do have other powers that are written that has to do with peace, order, and good government. And, if we're facing a severe threat, government is permitted to seize control of the country and forgo having an election while they apparently sort things out, which enter Trump and tariffs and all of this talk of tariffs being the worst threat we faced since World War II. This was what they said in the debate last night. So I do believe that these jokers are setting the stage to cling to power and put off an election and entertain a trade war with Donald Trump, which will be very, very, very bad for Canadians. And again, I wish the Trump administration would, I see sort of what's going on, right? And understand. But I do wish at the same point he would tone it down a little bit. Because, you don't want to annex a completely broken state, which is what we're heading to, right? Yeah. And being businesses are up and out the door. If you really want Canada, you don't have to break us first completely. And again, give us time to maybe get a new government in. But that's what I think that this rhetoric, and we see the liberal parties do this, is, this hyperbole, right? And these overamped, exaggerated threats, like they did it with the truckers, right? They immediately began to use military language, right? Like the siege. Yeah. And began to use militant terms. And we see them doing the same thing now with Donald Trump. And, now we're talking about emergency powers where you don't have to hold an election while you're under an emergency. And you're saying he's the greatest threat to Canada since World War II. I don't like it. I just don't like it. I don't like where it's going.
It's, the thing about Canadians, well, Canadian politicians at least, is that they are wildly predictable. And I think you're on the nose. I've been following this too, mainly through you. And I think you're right. Now, here's where I differ, and we can close on this because your voice is going, and I think I got to take a nap. Just all the shit that you've downloaded into my brain today.
Are you okay?
I'm good.
Imagine my mind.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Oh, no, you're a much stronger person than I am.
I was like a mother, right? Like, looking after these kids, right? And it was like, what?
Yeah, well...
I got red pilled in a big way during the pandemic, as did a lot of people.
Oh, I did too. So, I was...
That's a bit much.
I was like, I had, I was like deep in the red pill, realm after September 11th, 2001, and then I was like, I went too deep and I went into black pill world. And then I came out and, I was a columnist. I was writing for a couple of different publications at the time. And I had to be careful because if I went too far down that hole, my editors would call and be like, hey man, I can't publish this, dude. You're out of your fucking mind. And so I
be careful about that. Right?
Yeah.
For people is like, sometimes people have gone a little bit too far. And I'm trying to like pull them back a little bit.
Well, see, this was the thing is the crazy thing is all this stuff we're talking about now was all the shit that I was writing about 15 years ago. And I took a break. So I took a break. I wrote some things about Obama that were true and accurate. However, because of the color of his skin and because the Democrats had built it into a bulwark against any criticism of him, I was deemed a racist by certain editors in the world that I existed in, although Obama was dropping 3 bombs per hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for the last year of his presidency. I came back to writing. I launched my Substack during COVID because I was like, I was right, you fucks. I was right the whole time. The whole time I was right, you know? And like, Andy, like the stuff that you are putting out there, I'm like, I knew it. And you're just out there finding the documents and bringing them to us and saying, hey guys, the things that you're intuitively feeling, you're right. Just follow your heart. Just go with it. Now, where I break with the conventional line of thought in terms of what you just laid out in and a suspended election in Canada, which I completely agree with you. I think you're right on the nose. I think that's where we're going. But what I think they are going to spark a revolution in this country, because I think we're tired of this shit. I think people are tired of it. And I think the Freedom Convoy, as it is remembered, is going to be a cuddly love fest in comparison to what's coming. And this isn't a threat, it's a warning. Because I want the people, I know that there are people in the camps who are advisors, or at least have the ear of advisors to certain political candidates who pay attention to this podcast. And I want you to hear me clearly. This is a warning, because what you guys are doing, where you are taking us, you are putting Canadians in a position where we have no choice. We're going to have to fight. And if for whatever reason elections are suspended, you're going to spark that, because people, and like I said, the Freedom Convoy will be a blip on the radar compared to the tidal wave coming your way. And again, that's not a threat. I don't want to see that happen, but I don't know what else we have left. You know what I mean, Andy? Like that's the way I feel. Like what other options do we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the revolution is upon us, and it has been for some time. Revolutions don't start out loud. They start out pretty quiet behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, if we get suspended elections, which is what they seem to be setting the stage up for, then that would be the worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, again, why I would like to see, us try to adult and sort out our differences and come to acceptable, maybe not perfect, but acceptable solutions, which would, not only, tariffs are going to hurt both countries.
Yeah.
They're going to hurt us worse. There's no doubt about it. But I don't like the idea of retaliating against our greatest ally. I believe that we do have solutions where we can come to the table and work things out that will, instead of hurting each other, can be beneficial to both of us. Because although Canada's been a little bit of a lame duck, we do still have things to offer. But again, we have to have an election for that to happen, because I don't believe that whoever's in power, be it Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney or perhaps maybe Chrystia Freeland, whoever is going to be running what's left of their government after this leadership race, I don't believe that they have any real intention of doing the sort of negotiating that Donald Trump wants to be doing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a chicken or egg thing. America wants us to behave, so you threaten us with tariffs. Well, if you threaten us with tariffs, you might never get an administration that will give you what you want. And you say you want Keystone XL. You're not going to get it with the Trudeau government, right?
Yeah.
So you need to give us an opportunity to oust us. And if for whatever emergency reason, aka an economic war with the United States, were to break out, then we're not going to have that chance to get rid of him and give you an administration that will give you what you want, right? So I hope that people, and people understand that, and that we are very much being held hostage right now against our will.
Totally. And I do want to throw this out there.
Revolution, I do think, I think, we're going to be out there fighting? No, but I do think a lot of people will be angry and will be more inclined to be woken up if they do not get to participate in an election very, very soon. And will join, the sort of protest movements that we've seen before. Canadians were very apolitical, very apathetic. Again, when I said when I was going out door knocking, half of the people whose doors I knocked on, they didn't even know that we even had an election happening.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a big thing, federal elections in Canada. Most people were like, we didn't even know there was an election going on. I was like, you didn't know? Like, how can you not know that there's a federal election going on? These are people are going to dictate the next X amount of years of your life and what those years are going to look like and how prosperous they're going to be for you. So I do think that more people are going to join that movement. And again, more people have woken up. And yeah, that's how I did it is, I was watching the news during the pandemic and I was like, I just felt like something was wrong.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I was kind of like Dorothy in Oz. Like I was kind of like, there's a curtain here. What's behind it? Like who's pulling the strings behind this curtain? And I just felt like I wasn't getting all of the information. I had this gut feeling that something was amiss.
Yeah.
And that the wool was being pulled over my eyes. So I decided to go out and try to find information for myself. And
here we are.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
And now, thankfully I'm here and able to share it with all of you and hopefully reel you guys in and come along on the ride with me, right? I'll show you, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, I'll show you how deep it goes.
Yeah. And listeners, trust me, I've been down that rabbit hole before. I go down that rabbit hole quite a bit. Andy Lee will post something and I just see documents and I'm like, all right, time to smoke a joint, spend the next couple hours with this because here we go, baby. We're going deep. Just to kind of close it off with that, with what you were saying about a revolution and what you were saying about, Canadians waking up. See, my fear is this is that, yes, I hope it goes that way. I really, truly do. Because I'm a student of history. I know how revolutions usually end up and they don't end well for all parties involved, right? There's a lot of blood. And see, what I think may happen is exactly what you said. Trump threatens tariffs. The Liberal Party doubles down and threatens their own tariffs that really won't hurt him whatsoever. But we have a premier in Alberta, Danielle Smith, who is making frequent trips to Mar-a-Lago to try to come to some sort of solution, which is fucking crazy that we have a premier, which for our American listeners is like a governor, going down to try to negotiate on behalf of the entire country to try to solve this problem. But what I see happening is that if Canada just keeps doubling down, digging in further and further and further, I don't think we are very far from a scenario where the Trump administration says, fuck it, it's time to send in some military and solve this problem now, because the United States and China are edging closer and closer to war with each other as the days go on, right? And as Sam Cooper and many others have reported, we're not decades away. We're merely a few short years away from that war happening. And I think that the Trump administration, American intelligence, and the American military are all aware of the threat that Canada poses, and that if Canada will not solve this problem on its own, then it is up to the United States to solve this problem for us. And with all of the evidence that's been presented of the foreign interference in our country, the connections between Justin Trudeau, the United Front Work Department, criminal cartels, organized crime organizations, I believe that they already have the precedent to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that we're going to be invaded, but I wouldn't count it out, especially if China makes moves towards Taiwan.
It's a big geopolitical,
control of the North, probably, and we are unable to do it on our own, right? That's the reality. Our military has been gutted, demoralized, emasculated. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah. But again, I hope it doesn't come to a trade war, only because I'm afraid it could lead to suspended elections. And suspended elections could lead to a whole bunch of places where I would not like to see us going. So yeah, I'm going to leave you guys with that. It's been an hour and a half.
Yeah, your voice is going.
That's a lot of talking for me.
Yeah.
We can do this again.
Yes, Andy, I have four.
There's certainly, but I mean, I hope that this gave you a little bit of a broader look, right? Like, I don't
Oh, yeah.
look at like people are like, oh wow, this rich guy donated to Mark Carney. I'm like, yeah, but do you know the backstory of what's been
Yeah.
going on and what's been going on for decades? And this is how we've been, you know, taken over without a shot being fired. We
Yeah.
were quietly, slowly infiltrated on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I counted 4 episodes that we have to do because I want to cover the mining thing. I want to go into the Canada-China Business Council. I think there are some deep dives that we have to do, and I think this was a really good introduction to those episodes because we kind of touched it all broadly. But I would like to go into detail in the future. And Andy, I just want to thank you for doing everything that you do. You're the coolest mom in the world, man. And
Thank you.
you know, I like I said, you know, people like you are so important, and I'm just very, very happy to host a platform that that can host you and Sam Cooper and others, because you guys are the ones that are really moving the needle. And I don't think, you know, like with Sam, you know, I don't think you guys really understand the full impact that you're having, because the things that you're unearthing are traveling. And I think you guys are the ones that are creating the awareness. And I'm very, very grateful for you.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to my supporters, and thank you for that. That was very kind. A lot of people wouldn't have cared about Canada-China relations, and I certainly didn't even care about them myself, even though my own children were Chinese. And I'm not like Sam. Sam is a career journalist, this is, and an author, and very, very talented. So this is all very new to me,
Mm.
and very, very shocking and disturbing and upsetting. But it's an honor that people have taken an interest. And it also speaks to, again, that desire and that feeling that something is off, and then people go and search out for alternative sources of information, and then maybe sometimes that leads them to me.
Mm.
So it is an honor to serve Canadians and be able to do that, like I said. And also, I was just a housewife, a mom, right? I knew nothing about politics or about anything or about China. And now I'm finding Chinese spies operating in Canada on WeChat and Mandarin. So if I can do that in 3 years, then anybody can move the needle,
Yeah.
right? Like, you can move the needle,
Yeah.
you can do it.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it, right? So take up a cause, you know, and throw your weight behind it and see if you can move the needle yourself, right?
Yeah.
Again, if I can do it, I've got no training, I've got no funding, I've got, you know, no nothing, right?
Yeah.
I work with volunteers who help contribute to my research. Most of them are Chinese Canadians who have taken up this cause, and are also, they're not paid. So I mean, if we can do it, then anybody can do it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
make a difference. Try. Don't be
Yeah.
apathetic, right?
Yeah.
Apathy
Well,
is our worst enemy.
it really is. And it's poisonous, and it's something that we have to purge from Canadian society, and just, North American society at large, but specifically Canadians. Um, Andy, it was so awesome to finally wrangle you in for a conversation. I've been wanting to do this for so long. I have 4 that I need from you going forward, at least. Okay. And Andy, before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have a lot of time as a mom to maintain things. But my ex, formerly known as Twitter handle, is Real Andy Lee Show. So you can go there and look all this up. And I do have a Substack as well, which I don't get to as much as I would like to. It's called Sleeping with Giants. And that's an allusion to us being in bed with China. So if you want to look me up on Substack, it's Sleeping with Giants. If you sign up, you might have questions to answer, because I think it comes up with sleeping with on people's credit cards numbers. And so then when your spouse goes to your credit card bill, it's like, what is it? So I've got some complaints of people asking me what it is. But anyways, it's about us being in bed with the Chinese government. We have been, unfortunately, for some time now, and getting out of bed and into a healthy relationship is going to be very, very difficult. But we can talk about that more next time.
Oh, Andy, I wish I could talk to you forever. Thank you again so much. I've wanted this conversation for such a long time. I got it. It was everything I hoped it would be. And Andy, I really look forward to us talking again in the future.
You're very welcome. Like I said, the honor's all mine.